The Dakota Territory in the winter of 1882 offered no quarter to the weak. Snow fell in relentless curtains across the valley surrounding Thunder Creek, burying the rough-hewn cabins beneath white drifts that climbed past the windows. The creek itself, the artery that had lured prospectors and given the settlement its optimistic name, ran black and swift between jagged shelves of ice fed by mountain springs and tainted by the runoff from Magnus Klein's operation, gnawing into the hillside above. Tokala guided his spotted pony along the frozen bank on a morning when the sky pressed low and colorless as old iron. 28 winters had carved his face into sharp planes and left a pale scar tracing his left cheekbone, a gift from a cavalry saber 3 years past. Behind him, wrapped in buffalo hide that smelled of smoke and tallow, his niece Wyatt clung to his waist. She was 9 summers old, bright-eyed, and quick to laugh, though this morning she had complained of thirst. He had stopped where the current pooled in a quiet eddy, kneeling with her at the water's edge. She cupped her small hands and drank. The water tasted of stone and something else, a sharp, metallic trace that coated the tongue. They had grown accustomed to it. The white man's machinery upstream had changed many things. Half a mile downstream, Wyatt began to shake. Her body convulsed against his back, small hands clutching at his shirt. Tokala twisted in the saddle and saw saliva threading from the corner of her mouth, her fingers curling inward like claws, rigid and unnatural. Wyatt. He spoke in Lakota, low and urgent. Her eyes rolled white. No answer came. He dismounted in one fluid motion and caught her as she toppled sideways. On the frozen ground, she jerked and trembled, breath coming in shallow gasps, lips draining of color. Panic clawed at his chest, but he crushed it down. Panic killed faster than bullets. He lifted her back onto the pony and swung up behind one arm locked around her waist. The animal sensed his urgency and broke into a careful trot. They were still a quarter mile from town when the pony's hoof slipped on black ice, where the bank undercut sharply toward the water. The horse stumbled, hindquarters sliding toward the drop. Tokala threw his weight forward and hauled the reins with every ounce of strength in his shoulders. The pony's scrambled hooves kicking up frozen clods. For one suspended heartbeat, he felt the earth tilt, felt the black water waiting 20 feet below. Then the animal found purchase on a buried root and lunged forward onto solid ground. Behind them, the bank collapsed with a rifle-crack sound. Snow and earth sheared away and plunged into the current, swallowed in seconds. Tokala did not look back. He kicked the pony hard and rode for Thunder Creek. That same frozen morning, the westbound St. Louis, Dakota and Western line shrieked into Thunder Creek, with brakes fighting ice that had formed overnight on the rails. In the third car, an immigrant car with hard benches and a stove barely holding back the cold, Felicity Brandt braced herself against the window frame as the train lurched and shuddered. 23 years old, dark blonde hair pinned severely beneath a plain bonnet, she wore a simple wool dress the color of charcoal and cotton gloves that did nothing against the cold. A battered carpetbag rested in her lap. At her feet sat a small trunk, bound with leather straps, containing everything she had left of her father's medical texts, in German pamphlets on sanitation and diagrams of human anatomy that no respectable woman should possess. The train gave one final violent jerk. A wooden crate stacked carelessly near the rear broke loose and toppled forward, pinning a bearded man's hand against a bench edge with a wet crunch of bone. The man screamed. Others shouted in confusion German-English languages Felicity did not recognize. A woman fainted. 2 men tried to lift the crate and only made the trapped man scream louder. Felicity stood. She did not raise her voice. She moved to the crate and assessed the situation in 3 breaths, hand crushed between wood and iron blood, seeping shock setting in fast. "Stop pulling," she said in German, then English, her voice calm and surgical. "You You will tear the tissue. She stripped off her shawl, her only real warmth, and tore it into strips with steady hands. From her carpet bag, she removed a sewing kit and extracted 2 flat wooden slats meant for mending the bag's frame. On 3, lift straight up, not forward. She looked at the 2 men. 1, 2, 3. They lifted. She slid the man's hand free. He collapsed against the bench, sobbing and pale. Felicity knelt and examined the damage without flinching. 2 fingers clearly broken, possibly 3 bones, mercifully. Not protruding through skin, but swelling already blooming purple. She laid the slats along his damaged fingers and wrapped them tight, binding the fractures in place. As she worked, she spoke to him quietly. His name, where he was traveling, whether family waited, keeping him conscious and focused beyond the pain. You need a physician to set these properly, she said when she finished. This will hold until then. The man nodded, breathing slower now. Around them, passengers stared at Felicity with mingled awe and suspicion. Proper young women fainted at blood. They did not perform field medicine with the precision of a surgeon. Felicity ignored them. She repacked her bag, gathered her trunk, and waited for the train to empty. Outside Thunder Creek, waited beneath a sky the color of lead. Thunder Creek survived on 2 pillars, the Klein no. 2 gold mine that chewed into the mountain day and night, and the creek that watered the town and the scattered ranches, and a winter camp of Lakota families pushed into the hills by treaties they had never signed. Both were controlled by Magnus Big Sky Klein. Magnus stood well over 6 feet shoulders broad as a draft horse voice capable of carrying across canyons. His face was weathered leather beard, streaked iron-gray eyes, the pale blue of winter ice. He had arrived in the Dakota Territory in 1849, one of the first to chase gold rumors into the Black Hills. He had found it, claimed it, and built a town around it. But the easy gold was gone. Surface veins stripped years ago, the mine now had to dig deeper, crush harder, use more mercury to coax out dwindling flakes. The Klein No. 2 still produced barely enough to keep St. Louis creditors from foreclosing. Magnus was a man fighting to hold what he had built. And his methods grew less particular with each passing season. Tokala knew this. 5 winters of bargaining for food and medicine had taught him hard lessons about white men's promises. He carried Wyanet into Thunder Creek just past noon, weaving through narrow streets with the girl limp in his arms. People stared. Some muttered. A few made signs against evil. Tokala ignored them all. He knew where he was going. Dr. Emmett Barry's office sat at the end of a side street, a cramped structure with a faded sign reading, Physician and Surgeon. Tokala shouldered the door open without knocking and laid Wyanet on the examination table. Dr. Barry was lean and silver-haired in his 50s, spectacles sitting crooked on his nose. He looked up from his ledger, saw Tokala, and wasted no time. What happened? Creek water, then this. Tokala gestured at the trembling limbs as the saliva crusting her chin. Barry examined her quickly, pulse breathing the unnatural rigidity in her fingers. He frowned. Fever? No. Vomiting? No. Barry straightened, pulled a blanket over Wyanet. I will do what I can, but I do not know this sickness. Others have it. In the camp. In town, too. Miners. Their children. Barry paused, met Tokala's eyes. Something is wrong with the water. Before Tokala could respond, the door banged open. Cold wind swept in with Magnus Klein. He filled the doorway like a landslide. Barry, I need you at the mine. Cave-in broken. He stopped when he saw Tokala. His expression hardened to stone. What is this? A sick child. I am treating her. Magnus's gaze moved from girl to warrior to doctor. You waste time on savages when my men need you. Your man can wait 10 minutes. This child cannot. Magnus stepped forward. Takala shifted to place himself between the big man and the table. They stood less than a foot apart, and the air seemed to compress. Barry stepped between them. "Gentlemen." Magnus spat on the floor and turned toward the door. 10 minutes, Barry. Then I send someone to fetch you." He looked at Tokala one last time. "You stay with your people, Indian. I will stay with mine." He left. The door slammed. Takala waited until the sound of boots faded. Then he looked at Barry. "I will pay." "You do not need." "I will pay." Barry sighed. "Bring me a good deer hide. That will cover it." Takala nodded. He touched Wyannet's forehead gently, then turned and left without another word. He did not see Felicity Brandt arrive, but she saw him. She had stepped off the train an hour earlier, dragging her trunk across frozen mud. A man in a wool coat and broad hat had waited near the platform holding paper with her name written on it. "Miss Brandt." "Yes." "Magnus Klein. You are here by arrangement." Felicity nodded. The arrangement was a mail-order contract brokered by an Eastern agency. She had signed it 3 months ago, desperate and alone after her father's death left her with debts and no family. The agency promised a home, a husband's security. Not love, she had not expected that. Magnus took her trunk without ceremony and led her toward a large house at the town's edge. "You will stay here. We will marry when the circuit preacher comes next month. Until then, keep the house. Do not interfere with my business." "I understand." But she did not. Not yet. Now standing on the cold boardwalk outside Barry's office, she watched a Lakota man in buckskin step out and walk toward a spotted pony. His face was lean and hard-scarred along one cheek, eyes dark and distant. He moved carefully, as though injured, though he did not limp. A moment later, Barry emerged. He saw Felicity and stopped. "Miss Brandt, word travels fast in small towns." "Yes." Barry studied her face. Then he said, "If you ever need medical attention or see anyone who does come to me." "Thank you." She did not understand why he phrased it that particular way, but she remembered. 2 weeks passed. Felicity settled into the house, a strange half-life of cooking, cleaning, keeping silent. Magnus was gone most days, up at the mine or inspecting cattle. When he returned, he was tired, short-tempered. He did not hit her, but he watched her with cold possession that made her skin crawl. She unpacked her trunk in the small bedroom he assigned her. Medical texts her father had owned, anatomy, sanitation, German pamphlets about water quality and disease. She had helped him in his clinic for years, reading over his shoulder, assisting surgeries, learning what most women were forbidden to know. These books kept her sane. She read by candlelight, fingers tracing familiar diagrams, trying not to think about the life she had left behind. Then the sickness spread. In the Lakota camp, children lost control of their hands. They staggered, drooled, complained of headaches and stomach cramps. In town, miners developed identical symptoms. Men who had worked at the Klein know. 2 for years suddenly could not grip tools without trembling. Some lost feeling in their legs. Others vomited until they collapsed. Barry suspected the water, but had no proof. He went to Magnus. Magnus laughed. "You think my mind makes people sick? That creek ran for 1,000 years before I arrived. But the symptoms are coincidence, fever, superstition." Magnus leaned forward, voice dropping. "Do not speak of this again. The mine keeps this town alive. If people panic, everything falls apart. Understand." Barry understood. He left and said nothing more publicly. But Felicity heard him. She had been in the general store when Barry spoke quietly to the shopkeeper about the sickness. She listened without seeming to, and that night alone in her room, she pulled out her father's books. She found it in a German pamphlet about Hartz Mountain mining towns. The symptoms matched perfectly: trembling hands, loss of coordination, drooling blackened gums. Mercury poisoning. Felicity sat very still, pamphlet open on her lap, thinking about the creek. The mine. The barrels she had seen hauled up the mountain, each stamped with chemical symbols she recognized. The next morning, she went to Magnus. "I need to speak with you." He looked up from breakfast, annoyed. "About what?" "The sickness. I believe I know the cause." Something cold moved behind his eyes. "Go on." Felicity explained carefully: mercury amalgamation, the process extracting gold from crushed ore. The symptoms matching medical descriptions. If the mine dumped mercury-laced tailings into the creek, it poisoned everyone downstream. Magnus listened without interrupting. When she finished, he set down his coffee cup gently. "You are here to keep house, not play doctor." "I am not playing." "You are not a doctor, not a scientist. You are a woman who reads too much." He stood towering over her. "I will not have you spreading panic. Understand. But if people are dying, they are sick. Sickness happens." He stepped closer. "You will not speak of this again. Not to me, not to Barry, not to anyone. If I hear you have been meddling, there will be consequences." Felicity met his gaze and saw no mercy, only cold calculation. "I understand." That afternoon, Magnus locked her trunk of books in a storeroom. He did not explain. He did not need to. But Felicity had already memorized the important passages. The sickness did not pass. It worsened. In the Lakota camp, 2 more children fell ill. A 7-year-old boy lost the ability to walk legs, simply refusing to obey. He lay on buffalo hide by the fire, staring at the smoke hole above, crying softly. Elders gathered, spoke in low voices about bad spirits, but Tokala did not believe in spirits. He believed in poison. He rode back to Thunder Creek. Barry examined the boy, gave him a tonic that accomplished nothing, admitted he was beyond his depth. "I need to know what is in that water." "Test it," Tokala said. "With what I have, no laboratory, no equipment. I am a frontier doctor, not a chemist." Tokala's jaw tightened. "Then what do we do?" "We wait, treat symptoms, pray. Prayer will not save them." "No," Barry said quietly. "It will not." Tokala returned to camp with nothing. That night he sat by the fire with Wyatt, who had recovered enough to sit up but could not use her right hand. She tried to braid leather cord and kept dropping it, fingers jerking uselessly. Frustration twisted her young face. "Uncle, why am I broken?" Tokala had no answer. In town, miners refused to work the deeper shafts, afraid of whatever sickness lurked there. Magnus raised wages but could not bring enough men back. Output dropped. St. Louis creditors sent terse letters demanding payment. Magnus drank more, shouted more, spent long hours locked in his office with ledgers. Felicity watched him unravel from a distance. She kept the house-cooked meals, stayed silent, but inside her mind worked constantly. She needed those books. She needed proof. One evening, when Magnus rode out to inspect a broken sluice gate, Felicity waited until the house emptied. Then she crept downstairs to the locked storeroom. The lock was simple warded design, common and cheap. Felicity had watched her father pick similar locks dozens of times. She took a hairpin, bent it, carefully slid it into the keyhole. 5 minutes. The lock clicked open. Inside, alongside her trunk, sat crates of supplies, flour sacks, and a strongbox shoved into the corner, half hidden under canvas. Felicity opened her trunk first, pulled out her father's pamphlets, tucked 2 into her waistband beneath her apron. Then she looked at the strongbox. Unlocked. Lid closed, but not latched. She hesitated only a moment, then lifted the lid. Ledgers, letters, receipts, bound with string. She scanned quickly. Most mundane timber orders, worker payments, equipment bills. But near the bottom, something else. A letter from a St. Louis supplier, dated 3 months earlier, confirming shipment 500 pounds mercury technical grade amalgamation use. Another letter, Magnus, to a bank officer explaining the mine's yield was temporarily reduced, but would recover significantly once new exploratory shafts opened in the valley north of current operations. The valley north, where the Lakota camp sat. Her hands shook as she flipped pages. A rough hand-drawn map, the creek, the mine, dotted lines labeled Proposed Expansion Spring 1883. The dotted lines ran directly through the winter camp. But there was more. Beneath the map, a territorial survey document dated 1879. She scanned it quickly, pulse accelerating. The survey clearly marked the Lakota Valley as unclaimed tribal land, not subject to homestead provisions. Magnus had no legal claim to it whatsoever. He was not expanding his legitimate holdings. He was planning to seize land he had never owned. She heard wagon wheels outside the creek and snort of horses. Her heart lurched. She tore out Page's Mercury Orders expansion map, the survey document, folded them quickly, shoved them into her bodice. Then closed the strongbox, shut the door, locked it again with the hairpin. She was halfway up the stairs when the front door opened. Magnus stepped inside, shaking snow from his coat. He looked at her. "What are you doing?" "I heard a noise. I thought someone might be breaking in." He studied her long and hard, then grunted and turned away. "Go to bed." "Yes, sir." She climbed the rest of the stairs, closed her door. Only then did she allow herself to breathe. The next morning, a wagon overturned on the main street. It happened just after dawn. A freight hauler, drunk and careless, took a corner too fast on ice. The wagon tipped, spilling barrels and hay into the street. One wheel came down on a young boy playing in the gutter, pinning him by the chest. The boy screamed. His mother screamed louder. Takala, in town, trading furs for salt, dropped his bundle and ran. He reached the wagon in seconds, saw the boy's face going purple, did not hesitate. He waded into freezing slush, grabbed harness traces, cut them with his knife to keep panicked horses from dragging the wagon further. Felicity, returning from the general store with flour, heard screaming and ran. She reached the scene as Takala braced his shoulder under the wagon's edge. "Stop!" she shouted. He looked at her confused. "You will crush him if you lift wrong. On 3, lift straight up. I will pull him free." She dropped to her knees in icy mud. 1, 2, 3. Takala lifted. The wagon rose 6 inches. Felicity grabbed the boy under the arms, dragged him clear just as Takala's strength gave out, and the wagon crashed back down. The boy gasped and began to cry. Felicity checked his chest ribs, breathing. Bruised, but not broken. She tore a strip from her petticoat, wrapped a shallow cut on his arm, handed him to his sobbing mother. "Take him to Dr. Barry." The mother nodded, too shaken to speak, and hurried away. Felicity stood skirt-soaked and filthy. Takala stood nearby, breathing hard. Their eyes met. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. "You know medicine?" "A little." Before either could say more, a young ranch hand, one of Magnus's men, pushed through the gathering crowd. "That savage pushed the wagon, I saw it. He tried to kill the boy." Takala's expression did not change, but his hand moved toward his knife. "That is a lie." Felicity's voice cut sharp and clear. She turned to face the ranch hand. "He saved the boy. I saw it. You are just a woman." "I know exactly what I saw." Felicity stepped between ranch hand and warrior. "If you touch him, you answer to Mr. Klein." A bluff. Dangerous. But she said it with such conviction, the ranch hand hesitated. Sheriff Caleb Ford, gray-haired and cautious, pushed through with his hand on his pistol. What happened? The ranch hand started to speak. Felicity cut him off. A wagon overturned and pinned a child. This man helped me free him. Mr. Klein sent him to assist with livestock matters. If there is a problem, take it up with Mr. Klein directly. Ford looked at Tokala, then Felicity, then the ranch hand. He was not stupid. He could see the wagon the boy being carried away the cut traces. The story was obvious. Clean this up, he told the ranch hand. Then to Tokala. Move along. Tokala held the sheriff's gaze a moment, then turned and walked back toward his pony. Felicity watched him go. She did not know why she had lied for him, only that leaving him to the mob would have been wrong. That night, alone in her room, she unfolded the stolen pages and studied them by candlelight. The map, the Mercury orders, the survey document proving Magnus had no legal claim. She was holding proof of deliberate poisoning and illegal land seizure, but also holding a death sentence if Magnus found out. She folded the pages again and hid them between floorboards beneath her bed. Winter deepened. The sickness spread faster, no longer confined to those drinking directly from the creek. Miners washing hands before eating fell ill. Children playing near banks came home with trembling limbs and strange mouth sores. Barry began to look hunted. He moved from cabin to cabin town to camp, treating symptoms he could not cure. Boiled willow bark for pain, useless tonics watching people worsen. Felicity found him one morning outside his office staring at nothing. "Dr. Barry?" He looked up, startled. "Miss Brandt, may I speak with you?" "Of course." She sat beside him on the steps, silent for a moment. Then, "I know what causes the sickness." He turned sharply. "What?" "Mercury poisoning. From the mine. The symptoms match perfectly. I have read about it." "Miss Brandt, I am not asking you to believe on faith. I am asking you to let me help. I have training. My father was a physician. I assisted him for years." Barry studied her face, intelligence, determination, desperation. "If Mr. Klein finds out, then I will deal with him. But people are dying. Children are dying. If you know a way to stop it, you must act." Long silence. Then he nodded. "Very well, but you must be careful, and let me present any findings as my own. No one will listen to a woman's diagnosis, however accurate." "I understand." From that day, Felicity worked alongside Barry, moving quietly through town and camp. She presented herself as a woman helping the sick, nothing more. Boiled water for drinking, mixed charcoal and milk to ease cramps, taught people to avoid washing in the creek. Her technical knowledge began to matter. She suggested using snow from high ground, melted and boiled, instead of creek water. Advised cooling fevered patients with water taken upstream from the mine, where current ran clearer. Soaked cloth in vinegar to reduce fumes inhaled by miners near amalgamation barrels. Barry presented each idea as his own. Slowly, the death rate slowed. Not enough, but some. Tokala watched her move through camp with initial suspicion. Lakota did not trust white women, especially one belonging to Magnus Klein. But when Felicity knelt in snow outside his sister's lodge and asked in halting Lakota words Barry had taught her for permission to treat Wyanet, something shifted. "Why do you help us?" Tokala asked in English. "Because you need help." He considered that, nodded, let her pass. Over following weeks, Felicity returned often. Brought clean water, Barry's limited medicine instructions on scraps of paper, how to recognize early poisoning signs, which water sources to avoid, what foods might help expel toxins. Tokala watched her work with growing respect. She did not preach, did not pity, did not flinch from blood or sickness. She simply did what needed doing. One cold night, Barry asked her and Tokala to help transport 3 fevered patients, 2 minors, 1 Lakota elder, back to his office for closer monitoring. They loaded patients into a wagon and set out along the frozen road following the creek. The road was narrow, carved into a steep slope. Below the creek ran fast and black, too deep and cold to survive. Above hillside rose sharply crowned with snow-heavy pines. Halfway along the front wheel hit ice hidden under fresh snow. The wagon lurched sideways. The wheel broke through frozen ground crust and hung over the drop. The wagon tilted. The Lakota elder cried out. Others groaned, clutching at sides. "Do not move," Barry shouted from the driver's seat. He set the brake, but the wagon kept sliding inch by inch toward the edge. Tokala jumped down, braced his shoulder against the wagon bed. His boots skidded on ice. He could feel weight pulling him forward toward the drop. "Felicity, help me get them out." But Felicity did not move toward patients. She looked at the wagon, the angle of the wheel hanging in space. Looked at the hillside above where a dead pine had fallen, trunk half buried in snow. She ran. Barry stared after her, confused. Tokala, straining under the wagon's weight, had no breath to speak. Felicity reached the fallen pine, began digging with bare hands, scraping snow, until she found a thick branch broken near the base. 4 feet long, heavy, solid. She dragged it back, dropped to her knees, jammed one end under the axle. "Tokala, when I lift, you push." He understood instantly. Lever, fulcrum, force multiplied by distance. She threw her weight onto the branch. The wagon creaked, rose a fraction. Tokala shoved with everything he had. The wagon tipped back onto solid ground with a crash, patients tumbling against the far side. Below them, the ledge where the wheel had hung gave way with a sound like breaking bones. Snow, dirt, rock slid into the creek and vanished under black water. No one moved for a long moment. Then Barry climbed down, face pale. "We could have died." "Yes," Felicity said. She was shaking, cold or shocked, she did not know. Tokala looked at her. "Where did you learn that?" "My father. He taught me about levers, balance." "Your father was wise." "Yes, he was." They rode the rest of the way in silence. When they reached town, Tokala helped unload patients, then turned to Felicity. "You saved us." "We saved each other." He nodded slowly, swung onto his pony, and rode back toward camp. But Magnus's men had been watching. Next morning, Sheriff Ford came to Barry's office with a complaint. One of Magnus's ranch hands claimed Tokala had threatened him on the road, tried to overturn a wagon carrying white men. Ford did not quite believe it, but was obligated to investigate. "I heard Miss Brandt was there. Is that true?" "Yes." "Did the Indian threaten anyone?" "No. He saved us." Ford sighed, rubbed his face. "Then why is Klein's man saying otherwise?" "Because Magnus wants an excuse to drive the Lakota out," Felicity said from the doorway. Ford looked at her. "You should not say such things, Miss Brandt." "Why? Because they are true." "Because they are dangerous." Felicity held his gaze. "So is staying silent." Ford left without another word. But the seed was planted. People were starting to ask questions, and in a town like Thunder Creek, questions were as dangerous as black powder. Dead fish began appearing along the creek. First, a few pale bellies floating in slack water, then dozens, hundreds. The water took on a strange sheen, and snow piled along edges turned gray and oily. Lakota elders refused to let people drink from the creek at all, even boiled. They sent young men to carry water from higher springs, exhausting work in deep snow. The town, slower to adapt, continued using the creek for washing and livestock. More fell ill. Barry finally went to Sheriff Ford with suspicions and a rough written report. Ford read it, frowned, promised to look into it. Nothing changed. Magnus had Ford's loyalty, and Magnus insisted the sickness was fever, not poison. Felicity grew bolder. She made quiet visits to miners' shacks, talking to men who worked deeper shafts. She learned Magnus had cut costs by dumping tailings, crushed rock, and mercury sludge directly into the creek instead of hauling them to a containment pond. Faster, cheaper, completely illegal under territorial law. Though enforcement was rare this far from civilization, she wrote everything in a small journal hidden under her mattress. Names, dates, symptoms. Sketched a rough creek map marking which families drew water where. Noted children drinking from a spring a mile upstream away from mine runoff stayed healthy. Those using creek water did not. The pattern was undeniable. One night she showed Barry her notes. He read slowly, face grave. "This is enough. If we can get this to a territorial officer. Magnus will never let it leave town. He controls the sheriff freight wagons, even the telegraph operator. Then what do? We get proof he cannot deny. We go upstream to the tailings pile, collect samples, document everything, before he realizes what we are planning." Barry hesitated. "Miss Brandt, if he catches you." "I know." She left his office, walked home through dark streets. Snow falling again, soft and silent. Air smelled of wood smoke and horses. Somewhere distant, a dog barked. When she reached the house, Magnus waited in the front parlor. "Where have you been?" "At Dr. Barry's office. Helping with the sick." "I told you not to meddle. People are dying." He crossed the room in 2 strides and struck her across the face. The blow snapped her head sideways, sent her stumbling against the wall, vision blurring. "You will obey me." His voice was low, cold. "You are mine. You belong to me. Understand?" Felicity tasted blood. She pushed herself upright, one hand against the wall, and met his eyes. "I understand." He nodded, satisfied, turned away. "Go to bed. Stay out of my business." She climbed the stairs, locked herself in her room, pressed a cold cloth to her swelling cheek. In the mirror, split lip bruise already darkening. She felt no fear, only cold, clear anger. Next morning, she went to Tokala. She found him outside his sister's lodge, chopping wood. He looked up when she approached. His expression shifted when he saw her face. "Who did that?" "It does not matter. I need your help." He set down the axe. "What kind?" "I need to go upstream, to the mine, collect evidence of what Magnus is doing." Silence. Then, "If I am caught helping you, they will kill me." "I know. I will go alone if I must." He studied her face, the bruise, the split lip, the steady gaze. "Why do you risk this?" "Because someone has to." Takala considered, nodded. "We go tomorrow, before dawn." Relief washed through her. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet." Next morning, as sky lightened in the east, Felicity slipped from the house and met Tokala at town's edge. Barry was with him, carrying a satchel of glass vials. "You are both fools," Barry said, but he was smiling faintly. They rode upstream, following the creek into the narrow ravine, where the Klein No. 2 crouched against the hillside. Air smelled of sulfur and wet rock. Ground scarred with wagon ruts, littered with broken equipment. At the base of the tailings pile, Felicity dismounted, knelt by the water's edge. Filled 3 vials with gray-streaked water, capped them, carefully tucked them into her satchel. Then climbed the tailings pile boots, sinking into loose, poisoned muck. Near the top, she found what she sought, a broken barrel on its side, contents spilled across rocks. Inside the barrel, pooled in cracks and crevices, were beads of liquid mercury gleaming like silver tears. She scooped several into a vial, capped it, turned to climb back down. A rifle shot cracked. The bullet struck ground 2 feet from her, spraying mud and rock chips. Felicity froze. "Get down!" Tokala shouted. She dropped flat, began scrambling down the slope. Another shot cracked, ricochet whined to her left. Tokala spurred his pony toward pines higher up the slope. Barry grabbed Felicity's arm, dragged her behind a large boulder. "Who was shooting?" "One of Magnus's men. I saw him on the ridge." A third shot punched through air. Barry cried out, spun, fell, clutching his shoulder. Blood welled between his fingers. Felicity dropped beside him. "Let me see." "Not bad. Just a graze." It was not a graze. The bullet had torn through shoulder meat, missing bone, but opening a long, ragged wound. Blood soaked his coat. Felicity tore a strip from her skirt, bound the wound tight. "You need cover." "I can ride." Another shot, different angle. Felicity looked up, saw a man on horseback, higher on the slope, rifle braced. He fired again. Bullet struck boulder with a thunder crack. Tokala, halfway up the ridge, shouted and charged the shooter. His pony slipped on ice but kept footing. The shooter swung his rifle around, but Tokala was faster. He launched himself from the saddle, tackled the man off his horse. They tumbled together down the slope, punching and clawing. The rifle spun away, disappeared into snow. They hit flat ground and rolled to their feet, grappling. The shooter was Wild Will Hanley, one of Magnus's hired guns. Big man, taller and heavier than Tokala, scarred face and dead eyes. He threw a punch that snapped Tokala's head back, another that cracked his ribs. Tokala staggered, but did not fall. Drove his knee into Hanley's gut, slammed an elbow into the side of his head. Hanley stumbled, dazed. Tokala shoved him backward. They were on the creek's edge now, ice running thin. Hanley grabbed Tokala's coat, trying to pull him down. Tokala twisted. Both men crashed through ice into freezing current below. Felicity ran toward them, ignoring Barry's shout. She reached the edge as both surfaced, gasping and thrashing. Hanley grabbed Tokala's hair, tried to force his head under. Tokala drove a fist into Hanley's throat. The big man choked, let go. Felicity looked around wildly. A few yards away, half buried in snow, an old fence rail, probably from some abandoned claim. She grabbed it, ran to the ice edge. "Tokala, take this." She braced the rail against a rock, extended the other end over water. Tokala hooked one arm over it, other hand, still clutching Hanley's coat. For a moment, the three were suspended, Felicity, on ice, Tokala in water. Hanley half drowned and coughing. Then the ice cracked. A long, jagged line split the surface. Felicity felt ground tilt beneath her. "Pull!" Tokala shouted. Felicity threw her weight backward. Tokala kicked hard, hauled himself up, dragging Hanley with him. All three tumbled onto the bank as the ice section they had been on broke apart and slid into current. Hanley lay on his back, coughing water and wheezing. Tokala rolled onto his side, breath coming ragged. Felicity dropped the rail and collapsed, hands shaking. Slowly, Hanley reached inside his coat. Felicity saw the movement, lunged, grabbed his wrist as his fingers closed around a small pistol. No. They struggled. The pistol fell into snow. Felicity kicked it away. Tokala grabbed Hanley by the collar, dragged him upright. "Who sent you?" Hanley laughed, wet, ugly sound. "You already know." Tokala hit him once hard enough to snap his head back. Hanley dropped. From Hanley's coat, a leather pouch fell, spilled into snow. Felicity picked it up, opened it. Inside, script notes stamped with Magnus's seal in a folded paper. She unfolded it, read, "Payment on delivery. Take care of Indian trouble. Burn camp if necessary. MK." She looked at Tokala. "This is proof." "Of what?" "Everything." Barry, pale and sweating, staggered over. He took the paper, read it, tucked it into his satchel with vials of poisoned water and mercury. We need to get back to town. Now. They bound Hanley's hands with rope, hauled him onto a horse, then rode hard for Thunder Creek, racing the coming dark. They reached Thunder Creek just after sunset. Barry, barely conscious, slumped in his saddle. Takala led the group, face set and hard. Hanley, tied and glowering, rode between them. Felicity had the satchel. Inside vials, the note proof. But she knew it would not be enough. Magnus controlled the town, the sheriff. He could burn evidence and hang Takala before anyone in territorial government heard about it. They needed more. "Where are the ledgers?" she asked Takala as they dismounted near Barry's office. "What ledgers?" "Magnus keeps records. Mercury orders bank correspondence. I saw them. If we can get them, we can prove he knew what he was doing." "Where?" "A strongbox, in the storeroom of his house." Takala looked at her long and hard. "You want to go back there?" "Yes." "He will kill you." "Probably." Takala shook his head slowly. "You are a fool." "Yes." He almost smiled. "I will come with you." "No. Stay with Dr. Barry. If something happens to me, he will need you to get evidence to the territorial marshal. If something happens to you, it will not matter." She did not understand what he meant, so said nothing. They settled Barry in his office, left Hanley tied to a post outside, guarded by a Lakota warrior named Red Cloud, who had ridden in from camp. Then Felicity and Takala walked together through dark streets toward Magnus's house. Snow falling again, thick and silent. Boardwalk creaked underfoot. A few windows glowed with lamplight, but most of the town was dark. They reached the house. Felicity opened the door, quietly slipped inside. Takala followed. Front hall empty. Upstairs, a lamp burned in Magnus's bedroom. They could hear him moving, thump of boots on floor. Felicity crept toward the storeroom, lock still scratched from last time. She worked quickly. Within a minute, the lock clicked open. Inside, strongbox, exactly where she had left it. She lifted the lid, began pulling papers. Letters, ledgers, receipts. Handed them to Takala, who tucked them into a leather pouch. Then she saw something else. Hidden beneath old invoices, a second ledger newer than the others. She opened it. First page map of the Lakota Valley, drawn in ink. Across the top, Magnus's handwriting, New Klein Numbery Spring 1883 Expansion. Beneath the map notes, exploratory boring details, ore yield estimates, profit projections, and near bottom a plan. Current operation exhausted by Q2. Seize Valley land under Homestead Act. Claim abandonment due to hostility and disease. Federal support likely given local unrest. Use existing tailings to justify relocation. Survey document from '79 conveniently lost. No one will question ownership. Felicity's blood went cold. But there was one more page. She turned it. A letter from a territorial land office clerk dated 6 months earlier. Brief and bureaucratic, pair your inquiry territorial survey of 1879. Clearly marks valley north of Thunder Creek as unclaimed tribal land, not subject to homestead provisions. No private claim can be filed without congressional authorization. Original survey on file in Pierre. Magnus had known all along he had no legal right to the land. The poisoning was not just to create panic, it was to manufacture a crisis that would justify federal seizure of hostile territory, which he could then claim under special provisions reserved for pacified lands. She turned to Takala. He planned this, all of it. And he never had legal claim to your valley. Not ever. Before Takala could respond, footsteps sounded on the stairs. Felicity. Magnus's voice cold and sharp. She froze. I know you are down there. Takala moved toward the door, but Felicity grabbed his arm. Wait. Magnus appeared at the bottom of the stairs, lantern in one hand, pistol in the other. He saw Felicity, saw the open strongbox, saw Takala in shadows. His face went hard. "I warned you not to meddle." "You poisoned the water deliberately," Felicity said. Her voice was steady. "You killed children to steal land you never owned." "I did what was necessary to bring civilization to savages squatting on valuable territory." "You murdered them." "I removed obstacles." Magnus raised the pistol, aimed at her chest. "Put the papers down." Felicity did not move. "Now." Takala stepped forward. "If you shoot her, I kill you." Magnus smiled without humor. "You 1 man. I have 20. Then you will die first." They stood frozen, 3 people in dim lamplight. Then Magnus lowered the pistol slightly. "I do not need to kill you. I just need you out of the way long enough." He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded telegram, tossed it at Felicity's feet. "Read it." She picked it up, unfolded it. Telegram from Territorial Marshal in Pierre, dated 2 days earlier. Delayed by weather. Arriving Thunder Creek March 1st for inspection of reported hostilities. Expect cooperation from local authorities. March 1st was 3 days away. "The Marshal is coming," Magnus said. "And when he arrives, I will tell him Lakota warriors attacked the mine, killed my men, poisoned the creek to drive us out. I will show him bodies of miners who died from Indian revenge. Burned buildings. I will ask for federal troops to clear the valley." Felicity stared. "You are going to stage an attack?" "I am going to defend my property and this town from hostile savages. The story writes itself." "You are insane." "I am practical. This territory needs order, civilization, men like me who are willing to do what must be done." He raised the pistol again. "Now, put the papers down, or I shoot the Indian and you watch him bleed." Felicity looked at Takala. His face was calm, but she saw tension in his shoulders, hand hovering near his knife. She set the ledger down on the floor. Magnus smiled. "Good. Now." An explosion cut him off. Deep, booming roar that shook walls and rattled windows. Felicity stumbled. Takala caught her. Magnus spun toward the door. What in blazes? Another explosion. Closer, shattering glass, splintering wood. Magnus ran for the door. Takala grabbed Felicity's arm, pulled her toward the back of the house. "What is happening?" "The mine. He's blowing it up." "Why?" "To destroy evidence and blame us." They ran. Outside, night was chaos. Fire lit the sky above the mine, orange roaring. Smoke poured down the hillside, thick and black. Men shouting, running firing guns into air. Takala and Felicity reached town's edge as a third explosion ripped through the mine. Main shaft collapsed, timbers and rock cascading down slope. Dust and ash filled air. "He is going to burn the camp," Takala said. "We have to warn them." But before they could move, Magnus appeared out of smoke, flanked by a dozen armed men. He was mounted now, face lit by burning mine glow. "There," he shouted, pointing at Takala. "The Indian, he did this. He destroyed the mine." Men raised rifles. Felicity stepped in front of Takala. "He did not." Magnus blew the mine himself. "Get out of the way, woman." "No." Magnus spurred his horse forward. "Then you die with him." The rifles cracked, but the bullets did not find their mark. In the chaos of the explosions and the billowing smoke, Felicity grabbed Takala's arm and threw herself sideways, pulling him with her behind a stack of freight crates near the warehouse. The bullets punched into wood, splintering the crates and sending splinters flying through the air like angry hornets. "We cannot stay here," Takala shouted over the din of shouting men and crackling flames. Felicity's mind raced. They were pinned down, surrounded by armed men loyal to Magnus, with fire consuming the hillside above them, and nowhere to run. The smoke was growing thicker, acrid and choking, pouring down from the burning mine like a black river. Then she saw it. 20 yards away, near the mine supply depot, sat a row of large wooden kegs, marked with crude painted letters, lamp oil. They were stored against the outer wall of a warehouse, stacked 3 high, probably containing hundreds of gallons of fuel for the mine's lamps and machinery. And between them and the kegs, closer to their position, sat several smaller barrels marked with chemical symbols she recognized from her father's medical texts. One was labeled vitriol sulfuric acid, used in ore processing. Another read, spirits of turpentine. An idea formed, desperate and dangerous. "Do you trust me?" she asked Tokala. He looked at her eyes, dark and steady despite the chaos around them. "Yes. When I move, you run for the horses. Do not look back. Get to Barry's office, get the evidence, and ride for Pierre. Do you understand? I will not leave you. You have to. Your people need that evidence. I will follow if I can." Tokala gripped her arm. "You will die. Maybe. But they will die for certain if we do nothing." She pulled Barry's small single-shot pistol from her pocket, and the one she had carried to Pierre and back. "This will buy you time. Now go when I tell you." Before he could argue further, she did something she had never imagined herself capable of. She grabbed a burning piece of timber that had fallen from a nearby building, stood up from behind the crates, and hurled it with all her strength toward the barrels of chemicals. It fell short. "The woman!" Magnus shouted. "Take her alive if you can, dead if you must." 3 men broke from the group and ran toward their position. Felicity raised the pistol, aimed not at the men, but at the barrel of turpentine spirits, and fired. The small lead ball struck the barrel's wooden side and punched through. Clear liquid began leaking from the hole, trickling down the barrel's side and pooling on the frozen ground. "Now!" she screamed at Tokala. "Run!" He hesitated only a heartbeat, then broke from cover and sprinted toward where their horses were tied near the livery stable. 2 of Magnus's men turned to shoot at him, but the smoke was too thick, their aim wild. Felicity grabbed another piece of burning wood, this one longer and heavier, and ran directly toward the leaking turpentine. Magnus's men were almost upon her. She could hear their boots pounding their shouts. She threw the burning wood. It landed in the pool of turpentine spirits with a sound like a gasp, and the world exploded into flame. The turpentine ignited with a blue-white flash that turned instantly to roaring orange. The fire spread faster than thought, racing along the spilled spirits toward the other barrels. Felicity dove behind a water trough as the heat washed over her, singing her hair and stealing the air from her lungs. The first chemical barrel erupted, sending a gout of flame and acrid smoke skyward. The second followed a heartbeat later. The men chasing her scattered, shouting in panic, one of them on fire and rolling in the snow. The heat was intense enough that the lamp oil kegs began to weep moisture from their staves, the wood expanding and creaking. Then the fire reached them. The explosion was massive. A wall of flame and force lifted into the night sky, illuminating the entire valley in hellish orange light. The warehouse's outer wall blew outward in a shower of burning planks. The kegs, each one erupting in sequence like artillery fire, sent flaming debris arcing through the darkness. Felicity was thrown backward by the concussion, landing hard in a snowbank that probably saved her from being burned alive. Her ears rang. She could taste blood and smoke. Through the flames and confusion, she saw Magnus's men scattering horses, rearing and bolting, complete chaos replacing their organized mob. The fire had created a barrier between her and them, a wall of flame that no one could cross. She forced herself to her feet, every muscle screaming, and stumbled away from the inferno. The smoke was so thick she could barely see 3 feet ahead. She moved by instinct away from the heat toward where she thought the livery stable might be. A hand grabbed her arm and she nearly screamed, but it was Tokala. "I told you to run." she gasped. I do not take orders well. He pulled her forward. The horses are this way. Can you ride? I can do anything to get away from here. They reached the horses, spooked and wild-eyed, but still tied. Tokala cut them loose with his knife, lifted Felicity onto one, despite her protests that she could mount herself, and swung onto the other. They kicked the animals into motion and galloped away from Thunder Creek, just as another series of explosions ripped through the mine supply depot. Behind them, Magnus's voice rose above the chaos, screaming orders that no one could follow his carefully planned frame-up, dissolving into fire and smoke and confusion. Felicity and Tokala did not stop riding until they were a mile from town. Only then did they rein in the horses and look back. Thunder Creek was lit from behind by the glow of multiple fires, smoke rising like a funeral pyre into the frozen night sky. That was insane, Tokala said, and despite the dire circumstances, despite the pain and exhaustion, he was smiling slightly. Yes, Felicity agreed. She was shaking now, the fear catching up with her, but she was alive. They both were. But it worked. Where did you learn to do that? My father's books. He had a pamphlet about industrial accidents. I just hoped the principles would hold. Tokala looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his dark eyes. Respect. Recognition. Something deeper that neither of them had words for yet. We need to get to Barry, he said finally. Get the evidence and ride for Pierre before Magnus regroups. Can we make it? We have to. They turned their horses and rode hard through the snow toward Barry's office, leaving the burning town behind. They found Barry conscious and sitting up shoulder-bandaged when they burst through his office door. Red Cloud, the Lakota warrior who had been standing guard, had his rifle raised until he recognized Tokala. What happened? Barry demanded, seeing the soot and burns on both of them. We heard explosions. No time to explain, Felicity said, grabbing the satchel with the vials and papers. Magnus blew up the mine to frame the Lakota. He is rallying his men. We have to reach the territorial marshal in Pierre before he can stage another attack. You cannot ride alone to Pierre in winter, Barry said, echoing what he had told her before. You will die. Then we die, Tokala said flatly. He looked at Red Cloud. Take the warriors and the families deeper into the hills. Stay hidden until we return with federal marshals. Do not engage Magnus's men unless you must. Red Cloud nodded and slipped out into the night. Barry pulled himself to his feet, wincing. Take my spare horse. It is faster than what you have. And take this. He handed Felicity a small leather-bound journal. My medical notes. Every symptom, every death documented. If something happens to you, if you cannot testify in person, that journal might be enough. Felicity took it with shaking hands. Thank you. Go, and do not stop for anything. They left Thunder Creek as the first light of dawn began to gray the eastern sky. Behind them, smoke still rose from the ruined mine and the burned supply depot. Ahead lay 200 miles of frozen wilderness and a race against time. The ride to Pierre was a nightmare. The first day they pushed the horses as hard as they dared, stopping only to let the animals rest and drink melted snow. Felicity's burns throbbed. Her ribs, bruised from the explosion, made every breath an effort. But she did not complain. Tokala rode beside her, silent and watchful, his own injuries hidden beneath his stoic exterior. That night, the temperature dropped brutally. They had no choice but to stop to find shelter or freeze to death in the saddle. Tokala found a rocky overhang, barely deep enough to be called a cave, but sufficient to block the worst of the wind. They tied the horses in a cluster to share body heat and huddled together beneath the buffalo robe and what blankets they had. It was not enough. Felicity's teeth chattered so hard she thought they might crack. Her fingers had gone numb hours ago. Even pressed against Tokala's side, sharing the buffalo robe with the thick fur against both of them, the cold was a living thing that tried to squeeze the life from her bones. "We will not survive the night like this," she said through chattering teeth. Tokala did not answer immediately. Then, "We have to share more heat, closer." She understood what he meant. It was pure survival, nothing more. They were going to die, unless they kept each other warm. "All right," she whispered. He opened his coat and pulled her against his chest, wrapping his arms around her and cocooning them both in the buffalo robe and his buckskin shirt. She pressed her frozen hands against his skin beneath the layers and felt him flinch at the cold, but he did not pull away. They sat like that for hours, breathing together, heartbeats synchronizing the warmth, gradually returning to their extremities through the simple animal transfer of body heat. Neither spoke. There was nothing romantic about it, only the grim determination to live through the night. But in that darkness, pressed together against the killing cold, something fundamental shifted between them. Felicity felt the steady rhythm of his breathing, the strength in the arms that held her, the absolute trust required to be this vulnerable with another human being. She realized that she had never felt safer with anyone, not even her father. And Tokala, holding this strange white woman who had risked everything for his people, who had stood between him and death more than once, felt something he had thought died 3 years ago when the cavalry had destroyed his previous life. Hope. Not just for survival, but for something more. Something like a future. When dawn came, they were still alive. Barely. But alive. They rode on. The second day was worse. A blizzard rolled in from the northwest, the wind so strong it threatened to blow them from their saddles. They could not see more than a few feet ahead. Felicity lost feeling in her feet entirely. She tied herself to the saddle with a length of rope so she would not fall when exhaustion finally claimed her. Sometime in the afternoon, though, time had ceased to have meaning in the white blindness of the storm. Her horse stumbled and went down. Felicity was thrown clear landing in a snowdrift that cushioned the impact, but also tried to suffocate her. Tokala was beside her in an instant, pulling her up, checking for broken bones. The horse struggled to its feet, limping, but not seriously injured. "We are close," Tokala said, though Felicity had no idea how he could possibly know. 2 more hours, maybe 3. "I can make it," she lied. He looked at her with those dark, knowing eyes. "Yes, you can." And somehow, impossibly, they did. Pierre materialized out of the blizzard like a fever dream, solid buildings, smoke rising from chimneys, the blessed promise of warmth and shelter. They rode straight to the territorial marshal's office, barely able to dismount, and pounded on the door until it opened. Marshal Thomas Greer took one look at them, burned, frozen, half dead, and ushered them inside without a word. He sat them by the stove, brought coffee laced with whiskey, and listened while Felicity and Tokala told their story. When they finished, Felicity pulled out the satchel. The vials of poisoned water, the letters ordering mercury, the ledgers showing Magnus's plan, the survey document proving he had no legal claim to the Lakota Valley, Hanley's payment note, Barry's medical journal. Greer examined each piece of evidence in silence, his weathered face growing harder with each page he read. "This is enough," he said finally. "More than enough." He looked up at Tokala. "And you will testify, I will speak truth. Then Magnus Klein will face justice." Greer stood. "I ride out at first light with 6 federal marshals. But you two are not coming. You can barely sit upright. You stay here, rest and heal. When this is over, I will send word." What if he burns the camp before you arrive? Felicity asked, her voice hoarse. Then we will deal with that too. But from what you have told me, his plans are in ruins. His mine is destroyed. His men are scattered. He cannot execute his scheme now, even if he tries. Greer's eyes softened slightly. You have done enough, both of you. Let us finish this. Felicity wanted to argue but could not find the strength. Tokala beside her simply nodded. Greer was as good as his word. He left at dawn with 6 federal marshals carrying all the evidence Felicity and Tokala had risked their lives to gather. 3 days later, a messenger returned with news. Greer had reached Thunder Creek and found it quiet. Magnus had tried to rally his men for another attack on the Lakota camp on Christmas Eve, using the worst blizzard in years as cover. But his mob had fractured. Too many had seen the explosion, suspected the truth, lost their nerve. Only Magnus and Wild Will Hanley had pressed forward alone, carrying torches and kegs of black powder. Tokala's people had been ready. Red Cloud and the other warriors had set traps, pits covered with branches, tripwires strung between trees. 2 of Magnus's remaining loyal men had been injured before they even reached the camp. The 3rd turned back. Magnus and Hanley pressed on. They found Tokala's sister and the other Lakota warriors waiting armed and defiant. A brief, brutal fight followed. Hanley's arm was broken. Magnus was beaten unconscious and dragged back to Thunder Creek, tied across a horse like a slaughtered deer. By the time Greer arrived, Magnus was in a cell, and the town was holding its breath. Greer had arrested both men. The evidence was overwhelming. The territorial government moved quickly. The trial was set for late January in Pierre. The trial of Magnus Big Sky Klein took place in a packed courtroom on a cold January morning. Territorial Judge Abel Stern presided, a man known for his fairness and his refusal to be bribed or intimidated. Magnus sat in chains, face hard and defiant. Beside him, separately chained, Wild Will Hanley stared at the floor. The prosecution laid out the evidence methodically. The vials of poisoned water tested by a chemist in St. Louis and confirmed to contain deadly levels of mercury. The letters ordering mercury for amalgamation use, signed by Magnus. The ledger showing his plan to seize Lakota land. The payment note to Hanley. And most damning of all, the 1879 territorial survey document proving Magnus had never had legal claim to the valley he tried to steal. De Raconorn, Barry testified, describing the symptoms and the pattern of deaths, presenting his meticulously documented medical journal, every line of which Felicity had helped him write, though her name appeared nowhere in the official record. Miners testified about the dumped tailings, the threats, the atmosphere of fear Magnus had created. Finn O'Rourke, the farmer, who had witnessed Tokala's beating and done nothing, testified with tears streaming down his face, confessing that he had taken Magnus's money to stay silent. Tokala testified calmly and clearly, describing the sickness in his camp, the deaths of children, the desperation. He showed the judge his scars and explained with quiet dignity how Felicity Brandt had risked everything to help his people when no one else would. Finally, Felicity testified. She was not allowed to call herself a doctor or present herself as an expert, but she described what she had seen, what she had learned, and where she had found the documents. Her testimony was brief and factual, but every person in that courtroom could see the intelligence in her eyes and hear the conviction in her voice. When she finished, Judge Stern thanked her personally. The defense had little to offer. Magnus's lawyer argued that mercury was standard mining practice, that the sickness was coincidental, that Magnus had been trying to bring civilization to a savage wilderness. The argument was weak, and everyone knew it. But Magnus demanded the right to speak. He stood in his chains and admitted everything. The mercury, the dumping, the plan to seize the valley. "But I did nothing wrong," he said, voice calm and measured. I used the tools available to extract wealth from the earth. I saw an opportunity to expand, to bring order and prosperity to a lawless territory. If people sickened, that is unfortunate. But progress requires sacrifice. Civilization requires that hard men make hard choices. He looked directly at Tokala. You call it murder. I call it the inevitable march of progress. Your people are relics of a dying age. This land belongs to those with the will and the strength to tame it. The courtroom erupted. Lakota warriors stood hands on weapons. Judge Stern banged his gavel until order was restored. Mr. Klein. Stern said, his voice hard as stone. You have just confessed to deliberate poisoning that resulted in the deaths of at least 16 people, including children of both white and Lakota heritage. You have confessed to conspiracy to fraud, to attempted illegal seizure of tribal land, and to incitement of violence. The law does not care about your philosophy of progress. The law cares that you killed innocent people to steal land you had no right to claim. Magnus's face went pale. You are found guilty on all charges. You are sentenced to 25 years of hard labor in the territorial quarry at Jefferson City. Your property and assets will be seized to pay restitution to the victims and their families. And you are hereby banned from ever setting foot in the Dakota Territory again. Magnus's shoulders sagged. For a moment he looked like he might lunge at the judge, but the federal marshals held him firm. Wild Will Hanley, in exchange for his testimony confirming Magnus's orders and plans, received a lighter sentence of 12 years. The trial was over. Magnus was led away in chains. Outside the courtroom in the cold January air, Felicity stood with Tokala and Dr. Barry. None of them spoke for a long time. Finally, Barry broke the silence. It is done. Yes, Felicity said quietly. It is done. Tokala looked at her. What will you do now? I do not know. She had been avoiding that question. The mail-order contract with Magnus was void. He would never marry her now. She had no money, no home, nowhere to go. Come back to Thunder Creek, Tokala said. We need you. Both peoples need you. I am not a doctor. You are close enough. He glanced at Barry. Tell her. Barry smiled faintly. My shoulder will never fully heal. I need an assistant, someone who knows medicine, someone the people trust. He looked at Felicity seriously. I cannot pay much, but you would have a place, a purpose. Felicity felt something loosen in her chest. A place, a purpose. After so many months of drifting, of being property to be bought and sold, the idea of having a real place in the world was almost overwhelming. Yes, she said. I will come back. Spring came slowly to the Dakota Territory. The snow melted in grudging increments, revealing the scarred landscape beneath. The creek ran high and fast with runoff, but it no longer carried poison. The Klein No. 2 mine remained closed, its entrance sealed with timbers and federal orders. The territorial government declared the land around it contaminated and sent engineers from St. Louis to assess the damage. Felicity worked with those engineers quietly and without official credit. She showed them the water sources, the contamination patterns, the places where mercury had pooled in the creek bed. She helped them design a filtration system, layers of sand and gravel and charcoal, that could clean the water before it reached the town and the Lakota camp downstream. Dr. Barry presented the designs to the territorial authorities as his own work. They were approved. Construction began in late spring. Tokala organized work crews from both the town and the Lakota camp. Men who had nearly killed each other months before now worked side by side, hauling stones, digging trenches, building the filters that would save all their families. It was slow work, hard work, but it was also hopeful work. Wyatt recovered, though her right hand never fully regained its strength. She learned to braid leather with her left hand instead, and taught the other children to do the same. She became known as a healer in training, spending her days following Felicity and Dr. Barry from patient to patient, learning to mix medicines and stitch wounds and recognize the early signs of sickness. Not everyone recovered. 2 miners died from mercury poisoning even after the water was cleaned, their bodies too damaged to heal. 3 Lakota children suffered permanent damage tremors, difficulty walking, slurred speech. Their families grieved, and Felicity grieved with them, knowing that some wounds could not be healed, only endured. But the death rate slowed. The sickness stopped spreading. Fish returned to the creek, and slowly, painfully, the valley began to heal. In the town, attitudes shifted. Some people left unable to reconcile their prejudices with the reality of what had happened, unable to live with the shame of what Magnus had done in their name. Others stayed and began tentatively to see the Lakota not as enemies or obstacles, but as neighbors. Sheriff Ford resigned, unable to meet anyone's eyes, after it became clear how thoroughly Magnus had manipulated him. He was replaced by Jack Calloway, a young miner who had testified against Magnus at the trial. Calloway was fair, if not always wise, and he worked hard to keep the fragile peace. Dr. Barry's shoulder healed slowly. He regained most of the use of his arm, but he tired easily now and relied more and more on Felicity to handle the daily work of treating patients. She still could not call herself a doctor. The law and custom forbade it, but everyone in Thunder Creek and in the Lakota camp knew who to seek out when they were sick. In early December, nearly a year after the trial, a territorial officer arrived in Thunder Creek with a formal document. It was a water rights agreement signed by the territorial governor and witnessed by a federal judge. It recognized Lakota claims to certain springs and stretches of the creek. It was not a treaty. It did not restore the vast lands that had been taken over the years. But it was something. A foundation. A beginning. Tokala was named Scout Liaison, the official bridge between the camp and the town. He stood beside Dr. Barry in the town hall as the document was read aloud, his face impassive, but his eyes bright. Felicity watched from the back of the room, holding a folded copy of the water survey report she had helped draft, its edges smudged with ink and worn from handling. Later that day, she found Tokala outside the town hall, standing in the cold December air and looking up at the gray sky. "It is not enough," he said without preamble. "But it is more than we had." "Yes," Felicity agreed. He turned to her and pulled a folded map from inside his coat. "I want you to keep this. It shows the water sources, the boundaries, everything. If they try to take more, someone needs to be able to prove what the agreement says." Felicity took the map and unfolded it. It was beautifully drawn, every creek and spring marked in careful detail annotations in both English and Lakota script. "I made it," Tokala said. "But I used your notes, your measurements." She looked at him surprised. "You drew this?" "My father taught me, before the soldiers came." He reached into his coat again and pulled out another bundle, this one wrapped in soft hide. "I have something else for you." She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a pair of gloves, exquisitely made, lined with rabbit fur and stitched with intricate beadwork in colors that caught the winter light, red and blue and gold. "I cannot accept these," Felicity said, though she was already putting them on, unable to resist. "They fit perfectly." "You can. You need them. And you earned them." She looked down at the gloves, at the careful stitching, the hours of work they represented. "Thank you." Tokala shifted his weight, suddenly awkward, in a way she had never seen him. "There is one more thing I want to show you. Will you come with me?" "Of course." He led her out of town, up the hill to a place where the creek ran clear and cold over smooth stones. There, someone had carved words into a flat boulder that sat beside the water. The letters were deep and clean, cut with care. Here the water runs clean. Here we choose to live together. The words were written twice, once in English, once in Lakota. Felicity read them and felt tears sting her eyes. Who did this? All of us. The town and the camp. Together. He paused. It is not perfect. There is still anger, still fear. But it is a start. Yes, Felicity whispered. It is a start. They stood there for a long time, watching the water flow. The creek was not yet fully healed. It might never be completely free of the poison Magnus had poured into it. But it was cleaner than it had been, and it would continue to improve with each passing season. Below them, Thunder Creek was preparing for Christmas. A large evergreen had been set up in the town square, decorated with carved wooden animals and scraps of colored cloth. It was safer than candles, and it reminded everyone of the night a year ago, when everything had changed, the night Tokala had found Felicity collapsed in the snow, the night they had begun this impossible journey together. What will you do now? Felicity asked quietly. Tokala was silent for a moment. Then he said, I will do what I have always done. Protect my people. Try to build a future for them. He looked at her sidelong. But I would like you to stay. Not as the doctor's assistant, as a partner. Someone who works beside me. Someone who helps our people. Both our peoples. Felicity's heart beat faster. This was not a proposal in any traditional sense. There was no talk of marriage or possession or binding contracts. It was something else entirely. An offer of equal partnership, of shared purpose, of mutual respect between two people who had survived hell together. Yes, she said. I will stay. Tokala smiled, and it transformed his usually severe face into something warm and young. Good. He took off the wool blanket he wore over his shoulders and draped it around her, arranging it so that the softer lined side rested against her skin, while he kept the rougher edge for himself. It was a small gesture, but weighted with meaning, protection, respect, and a future shared by choice rather than circumstance. They walked back down the hill together, side by side, and rejoined the gathering in the town square. Music played, a fiddle from the town, a drum from the camp, the two rhythms weaving together into something new. Children ran and laughed, their voices high and bright. Adults talked quietly, sharing food and stories, building the fragile threads of community. Felicity looked around at the people, Lakota and white miner and warrior healer and farmer, and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. The creek ran cleaner. The valley was at peace, or at least at truce. The future was uncertain, but they would face it together. Far away in a stone quarry in Missouri, Magnus Klein broke rocks under the harsh sun. His hands bled. His back ached. Every day he cursed the woman and the warrior, who had destroyed him, who had taken everything he had built and ground it into dust. But in Thunder Creek, no one spoke his name anymore. The valley belonged to the people who lived there, now people who had learned slowly and painfully that survival sometimes meant working together instead of tearing each other apart. And at the center of that fragile peace stood two people who should never have met a Lakota warrior, who had learned to trust a white woman and a mail-order bride, who had found her true calling, not in marriage, but in healing. They had saved each other, and in doing so, they had saved everyone else.